you on that.
Okay, I'll bring up the slides in just a moment, but just for those watching this and the recording, let me just introduce myself. My name's Iain Martin. I've been involved in the franchise industry for almost 30 years now. You can tell by my grey hairs that I've been around a little while, and during that period, I've done pretty much everything you can do in franchising. I've been a franchisee. I built a franchise network, and I've built several franchise service companies, and today I'm involved primarily in the franchise matchmaking business, bringing brands into the UK, helping people who want to get into franchising to find something that works for them, and working with franchisors to help them build their networks. So without more ado, I'm going to, what I'd like to do in the next 15 minutes is to sow some seeds in the minds of those watching this about why franchising is something that's worth considering if you've got issues in your life, in your career, in what you do, that are creating tensions for you. What do I mean by that? Well, I came out of, before I got involved in the world of franchising, I was in the corporate world. And if the corporate people said, we want you to move here to take on this particular role, you know, everything, there was upheaval everywhere. Family had to move, everybody moved. Often the company felt it had bought your time. We want you to do this at the weekend, or we want you to do this at this particular time of the day or night. And time was in a sense not my own. And the family suffered, and the agenda was being driven by the corporation rather than the lifestyle that I was hoping being part of the corporation would give me. And so the thought behind this title frame is, why do you need to actually look at ways of controlling the time involvement in your current job or whatever you're doing, when actually by a change of career, and here we're thinking about in the context of franchising, you could achieve everything else that you're looking for as well. Next slide. So what I want to do is to just sow some seeds in your mind to, so you can ask the question, what applies to me? How might it be achieved? And what would I need to do? What would you need to do to actually make that become a reality? Next. So just by way of background, franchising began well over 100 years ago now with the Singer sewing machine company. And the issue they were trying to solve was, how do they service these machines when they were spread huge distances in the USA? And how do you actually get these machines serviced with local people who are going to be motivated to do a good job? And the solution they came up with was effectively awarding the right to provide servicing to their machines to people based locally, who built up had a local customer base of people with Singer sewing machines. And of course, from there, particularly during the 50s and 60s, some other very major brands that you would all be aware of moved into expansion through franchising. The primary reason that many of them did it was because, in effect, they're driving their own expansion through using other people's capital, which gives you scale and brand value far more quickly than you could do by trying to finance your growth using your own capital, or even venture capital or other types of financial backing. Next slide. So, interestingly, in the UK, there is no formal or legal definition of franchising, but for the purposes of this presentation, franchising is a form of business structure in which a firm that has already got a successful product or service licenses its trademark and method of doing business to another business or individual in exchange for an initial fee and an ongoing royalty payment. One thing that's important about this definition is that you shouldn't, or or arguably can't franchise just an idea. Or if you think franchising is going to solve a fundamental issue or problem with your business, it ain't going to work. You're starting with something that is already working well, and then through systematizing that, you make it available for other people to develop normally in a geographic area or territory, but they're following your proven system. Next slide, please. And today, there's just a selection of brands here. There are something like 1,500 different franchise brands available in the UK today. Some of them are just amazing. Others of them you'd want to avoid at all costs. There are some people, like in any sector of business, who are just interested in taking money from somebody else and not really delivering something of value. But there are some outstanding ones over a whole range of different services and products and sectors, which could be a great opportunity for some of you. Next slide, please. So what do you get as a franchisee? You will get support to build your business to look like the business the franchisor has already built. So you'll be trained in effect doing what the franchisor has already done. A good franchisor will have a full training system. Sometimes that's classroom. Sometimes it is in the field, and often it's a combination of both. But you'll be working with a proven business model. Often you don't need sector experience. In fact, many franchisors prefer that you don't have sector experience, because you're then more open to listen and do things the way that they want. And as we'll see in a moment, a good franchise represents a much lower risk when compared to starting your own DIY new business. And also, and probably very importantly, because franchising is based on replicating success, banks and other funders are much happier to provide backing for a particular franchise concept. Next slide, please. So some of these statistics may be familiar to many of you, but if you do start your own business, a DIY startup effectively, 20% of those startups are no longer working after 12 months. 50% make it or don't make it to 3 years, and after 5 years, only around 20% are still trading. When you compare that with a franchise, you'll find that after 10 years, 50% of those who started a franchise will still be operating, and the vast majority are still operating after 3 to 5 years. So the success rate, if the match is good, is a much, much higher one. Next slide, please. So why do businesses fail? Why do DIY businesses fail? Well, obviously, by definition, there's no brand recognition and therefore a lack of visibility to the world at large. If people don't know you exist, it's difficult for them to buy your product or service. Often people have dreamlike business plans that show what one might term a hockey stick projection in revenue, where they get funding based on very ambitious growth plans. When those don't materialize, they then find they haven't got enough cash to make everything work. Often there's a lot of, depending on the sector you're in, there's a lot of red tape or legal stuff that you've got to comply with. That would be true in any regulated sector like home care, for example. Sometimes people assume that because they've had a light bulb moment that they're going to outgun the competition. Many times they don't. The competition's obviously the ones with the traction in the marketplace. And frankly, often they're not the great business or financial managers as they thought they were. By comparison, in franchising, because you're dealing with a brand, you've got brand visibility. Somebody else has already worked out everything you need to comply with legislation. You'll be given a standard business plan, which will be tailored for your local territory. By definition, how you compete with competition. It's all part of the business system. And because a good franchise system covers every aspect of the business, from how do you get customers, how do you retain them, but how do you manage the business as well? What are the controls you put in place? How do you measure where you're going and what's going right and what's going wrong? So it gives you a far better handle on how to make things work. Next slide, please. So for many people, when you're thinking about what you want to do going forward, and you, so for example, you might have somebody who's in a great career, paying lots and lots of money. They might be enjoying aspects of the job, but they never see their family, and therefore the marriage is kind of under pressure. The kids wonder what their father looks like, and you might sort of say, well, this is actually not where I want to be, either now or certainly not in a few years' time. And therefore, for somebody like that, choosing a franchise that can operate, say, from Monday to Friday in normal business hours, of which there are a lot out there, could be a great option for them if it's in a sector that they would enjoy and gives them the opportunity to use the skill set that they're strong and good at. So for people who have got pressures, whether it's in terms of time or they just don't like the corporate politics or whatever it might be, then franchising is a way of moving into a different environment where those same pressures are not there. And obviously, if you're open-minded on the type of brand that you would want to work with, then there is a lot of choice available to you. Next slide, please. And therefore you can get into this situation. I can't quite remember who said this, but it's a great phrase: do what you love and never work a day in your life. In other words, if you love what you're doing, then it no longer becomes work, because it actually is, you've got a good balance between your family, hobbies, whatever else you do in the community or elsewhere, and you're doing stuff that drives income and often gives other people employment as well. Next slide, please. So what are the things that Mr. Franchise does is we use a very sophisticated profiling tool that actually identifies what you are good at, and recognizing that none of us are actually brilliant at everything. And based on that and various other guides that we use, we're able to match you to franchises that require your strengths. So, for example, you know, if sales just isn't your thing and you don't want to be employing salespeople, then actually operating a retail franchise could be a good option, because then you're promoting in a different way, and the customers will come to you and walk through your front door, and then you've just got to look after them well when they're there. And there are many other examples as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of identifying something that could be a good fit, yes, use a good advisor. That's one service that Mr. Franchise operates. But don't be conned by all the gloss that you might see on websites or in magazines or even at exhibitions. A franchise business doesn't automatically mean it's great. It's very important to get a good feel of what's out there, to look at various brands in different sectors. Bear in mind, you're not buying a job. Sometimes I've had people sort of say, well, you know, who's going to make sure I get paid on the last Friday of the month? Well, you're running the business. It's your business. It's down to you to manage it. It's not a job. You're just using somebody else's formula to actually deliver goods or services to your customers. And when you're buying a franchise, because you're buying the system, you're not buying a going concern for the most part. I mean, you can buy an existing franchise as a resale, but most franchises are sold as a greenfield opportunity where you're told exactly what to do and you build the thing up from scratch. And will be, obviously, there's an investment of money. Your income will grow year on year. And after 3 or 4 years, it can be a very, very rewarding experience financially and in other ways. I've said franchise or franchise relationship should be symbiotic, because both should need each other. If you've got a situation where you've just been sold a business where the franchisor has very little ongoing relationship with you, then it creates a little bit of resentment, because there's normally an ongoing fee commitment to the franchisor. Normally, a good franchise will be one where the franchisor is making a contribution to the success of the business, maybe through marketing, through product supply, or in other areas, and obviously where the franchisee is looking after the local customers. And so whilst it's important that profits generated in a lifestyle type franchise, other things are important as well, like the time you can spend with your family. Next slide, please. So at this point, before my final slide, George, do you have any immediate questions that leap to mind? I appreciate that as a GP, you've probably got the pleasure of making life good for people or happy for people by making their bodies work again. But also, I know GPs are under huge pressure these days, and so you've got a real tension there. But what questions can I answer for you?
I don't have any. I'm not the GP, by the way, Ian, but I don't have any particular question. I must say it's very interesting. I know nothing about the franchise world.
I thought you're not a doctor then.
Yes, I'm a doctor, but I work not a general practitioner.
Not a general. My mistake. Yeah.
No, that's all right. That's okay. No problem.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the last slide, Jean-Francois. So as you'll notice, if you look at the first letters there, why, what, how, and you, if anybody who sees this presentation does feel that exploring franchising could be a good option for them, then certainly Mr. Franchise, either myself, one of my colleagues would be delighted to talk to you. But franchising is not a panacea. At the one end of the scale, you've got people who really should be in employment because they need to know that the money's coming in every month. At the other end of the scale, you've got people who are so entrepreneurial that they drive the franchisor crazy by wanting to change everything within the first few minutes of taking on the franchise. So there's a big space in the middle where franchising can be the right option for somebody. And the way we approach, if somebody comes and said, look, I'd like to own my own business and don't quite know what is right for me, our starting point isn't to talk about particular brands, it's to talk about you. Let's talk about the lifestyle you're looking for. Let's talk about how much you want to invest. Let's talk about the income you want to get out of the business. Let's talk about whether you want to work from home or whether you want to be away from home, operating from premises. Do you want to be managing a team of people, or do you just want to be operating on your own? Would you prefer to be operating in the business to consumer sector or business to business sector, and so on and so on and so on. And so we build up a profile of you in terms of what's going to work for you, and then based on that we'll present concepts to you that tick your boxes, and very importantly where you tick the boxes of the franchisor. So I think my time is up, Jean-Francois. I'd be delighted to pick up with anybody on an individual basis if they would like to do that. And it's been a pleasure meeting you, George. Always a pleasure talking to you, Jean-Francois. And here to help if I'm able to do so.
It's absolutely amazing. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. I was wondering actually what kind of franchises do you actually represent that you actually really introduce to other people?
We work right across the spectrum, Jean-Francois. So I work with everything from retail, food and beverage, to service brands delivering different types of service either to consumers or to corporate businesses. It is, as long as it's wide. And the important thing though is finding a brand that is right for the individual, and also assessing their appetite for risk. Although franchising is a lower risk option than many other types of business startup, actually, if you've got a franchisor who's only got, say, one franchisee, the potential risk for failure, because he hasn't proven it over a lot of franchises, is higher than somebody who's got 50 or so franchisees out there and they're all kind of doing okay. So